Right, guys, if I can just get everyone to sit down again, ready to listen to Josie. Josie's done us an amazing talk from Pesticide Action Network. Yeah, I'm sure it's awesome. So, yeah, if everyone's ready, and Josie, you're ready, awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. Thank you so much for having me. I'm also a Green Party member, but in Brighton. Yeah, my name's Josie Cohen. I'm head of policy and campaigns at the Pesticide Action Network, and I'm here today to talk to you about pesticides, although someone has moved all of my notes, so I'm just going to take them back. So just to tell you a quick who we are, so we're Pan-UK. We were started 40 years ago. We're part of a global network, Pan-International. So the Pesticide Action Network, we were actually started around the Bhopal disaster in the 80s. We're a small organisation based in Brighton. We originally started actually by the trade unions who were working on pesticides but didn't feel like they had the technical expertise to go up against the industry to advise government. So we were started as a think tank almost of experts on pesticides, but focused on reducing pesticide harms to human health and the environment rather than selling chemicals, because most of the experts in this arena are within the industry. So my name's Josie and I'm head of policy and campaigns. I'm going to give you a quick overview of pesticides, and then the second half of my presentation will focus on our Pesticide-Free Towns campaign, which I'll get into a bit later. So, just to start at the beginning, what are pesticides? So pesticides are poison designed to kill living organisms, and they're very, very good at it. It's an umbrella term, so it includes insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, mosticides, rodenticides, parasiticides, flea treatments that you put on dogs and cats. So it's really any chemical designed to kill something living. They're the only chemicals released into the environment on purpose. So all the other chemicals ending up in the environment are leaching out of things by accident, but we slosh pesticides around in the environment on purpose. And where are we exposed? We're exposed in our food, in the countryside, in urban public spaces, in private gardens, veterinary medicines, as I mentioned, that we put on dogs and cats and pets and livestock, biocides and kind of ant powders and things like that in our houses, and interestingly in period products. So in tampons and sanitary towels have a lot of pesticides in them from where the cotton has been grown. So the impacts of pesticides, sorry, these are not very cheery, these opening slides. And you'll all be aware of this, but obviously we're in a nature crisis, crazy biodiversity declines at the moment, and pesticides have really been named as one of the key drivers. And they're a key driver both in terms of their direct impact on living organisms, but also in terms of their indirect impact by removing much needed habitat that wildlife needs. So we've seen huge insect declines globally. The specific attention actually has been on bees because of really the focus on honeybees. But they are just kind of symptomatic of the declines we're seeing. And the UK is now one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. You can see some of the statistics up there. 50% of lost 50% of farmland bird species since the 1970s. 97% loss in hedgehog numbers. And I'm really sad when I talk to my friends' kids who've never seen a hedgehog. I remember, we saw them about all the time. And the windscreen test, I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but, driving around when I was a kid, you'd have to stop every so often and wipe the bugs off your windscreen. I drove up to Scotland last year, didn't have to stop once. So it's really stark. But what we're seeing actually, which is good to see, is now the focus on climate change is expanding to also realise that biodiversity declines are a problem. We're now starting to see people declare climate and biodiversity emergencies. So, we've got the Convention on Biological Diversity, which isn't quite as high profile as the climate change COPs yet, but we are starting to see a kind of focus on restoring nature, and that just tackling emissions is not going to be enough. Another cheery slide for you. So there are obviously impacts of pesticides on human health. There are two types of poisoning that we talk about. So there's acute, which is a harmful or a lethal effect after a single episode of exposure. So that's a chemical that from one exposure episode causes anything from, respiratory tract irritation or eye and skin irritation all the way up to headaches or seizures and even death. I'm pleased to tell you that the most acutely toxic pesticides have all been banned in the UK. They've been got rid of over the last 20, 30 years, mostly due to our membership of the EU, but they're still used all over the world in other countries. Then there's chronic exposure, which is the harmful effects over an extended period of time. So it's repeated or continuing continuing exposure at low levels, it's been linked to a range of serious diseases like Parkinson's and cancer, but it's really hard to prove. So where the pesticide industry does not argue that some of their products are acutely toxic, they will fight tooth and nail any connection between one of their products and something like cancer or Parkinson's. So I'm sure a lot of you will have seen the debate around glyphosate in particular and the links to cancer. But those applying pesticides tend to be most at risk. So 44% of farmers are poisoned at least once per year by pesticides, and there's also elevated things like cancer risk amongst farmers' families, and so they're really on the front line, the people using pesticides. And children are the most vulnerable, actually, for a number of reasons. So one is they have increased exposure, so the way they behave, crawling, putting things in their mouth, lying on the floor, spending time in parks and playgrounds that tend to be sprayed. They also absorb pesticides more easily through their skin. So their skin is more permeable and their skin surface is relative to body weight. So they absorb higher rates of pesticides. Their ability to cope with pesticides is less than adults. And because their systems are developing, it can cause kind of irreversible damage. The last thing to talk about is the cocktail effect. I'm sure many of you will have heard of this. Sorry, I said it's not cheery. I'll move on to more positive things, I promise. The cocktail effect, which is this growing body of evidence that shows that chemicals, when they're combined, can be more harmful than individually. But our regulatory system still sets safety limits, one chemical at a time. So when we're looking at the impact on bees or on human health, we're looking at just one chemical. But if you imagine that you can have 10, 15 residues of pesticides on one apple, let alone all the chemicals that are out in our landscape or in our rivers, no one's really looking at those interactions, and that's something we're pushing to change. Oh, and it can also harm pets. Yeah, we've just done a report on pet poisoning looking at cats and dogs, but I'll leave that there. So pesticides used in farming. So pesticides really are the foundation of industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture is responsible for a third of all emissions, as I'm sure you all know, and it is impossible. You cannot create huge swathes of land of monocultures without then using chemicals to keep pests away. So it really does underpin industrial agriculture. And since the birth of agriculture, people have used substances to control pests, but synthetic pesticide use really started after World War II. Europe really needed to massively increase its food production, and chemical companies were looking for markets for their product that they developed for warfare, and they were now looking for products. And you see a lot of the same chemicals like 2,4-D that's used in towns and cities. That's the chemical in Agent Orange that was used in the Vietnam War. So you sort of see those links between chemical weapons. 99% of pesticides are made from fossil fuels, so there's a really strong connection to climate change. So we have a lot of the industry and politicians arguing that sort of this argument around land sparing. So they're saying what we need to do is intensify agricultural production on a smaller amount of land, and then we can leave other land to go wild, sort of claiming that pesticides somehow kind of form part of the solution. So it's really important to sort of nip that in the bud. And actually, pesticides, they produce a huge amount of CO2 throughout their life cycle: manufacturing, packaging, transportation, application, environmental degradation, and disposal. It won't surprise you that many of the biggest oil companies, such as ExxonMobil and Shell and Chevron, produce pesticides or their chemical ingredients. So it's very strongly linked. And what it does is it creates this vicious cycle of between chemical dependency and worsening climate breakdown. So as temperatures rise, the amount of pests increase, crops resilience goes down, and then you need an ever larger amount of pesticides to deal with the pests. So it's sort of creating this vicious cycle. In the UK, we have about 400 active substances approved for use as pesticides, or as plant protection products, as the government likes to call them, because it's friendlier. We've looked at the data and pesticide usage. It is actually generally going down. There's been small decreases in the weight of pesticides applied since 2016. The area of land being treated with pesticides has gone down a bit. But the intensity at which pesticides are being applied, so the average kilogram per hectare, has largely remained the same, which means wildlife in those areas are being exposed to the same sort of toxic load that they were previously. But that is a little bit of good news. Glyphosate use has increased, both in terms of weight applied and land area treated. And the 3 neonicotinoids that I'm sure you all know, because they're very famous for harming bees, they have been replaced, but with other insecticides largely, which is disappointing. We spend a lot of time, I think there was a long time where environmentalists and farmers were sort of pitted against each other on this topic. It was very much presented as kind of the lunatic environmental movement versus the industry and farming, but that's really changed. And one of the things that's changed is the creation of the nature-friendly farming networks. I don't know if you guys have heard of NFFN, but they were created to create a counter voice to the National Farmers Union, which is very, very pro-pesticides. And what that has allowed is for nature-friendly farmers to have a voice, to have an influence, and that is really making a difference. And you know, if you want to become a millionaire, you don't become a farmer. It's a really hard job. There's only 200,000 farmers left in the UK. They're having a hard time. So we've been lobbying for support for farmers because currently they get subsidies based on the size of their farm, which really encourages industrial scale farming. But we're pushing for public money for public goods and farmers to get payments for pesticide reduction. And actually we had a win this year when the government brought in, now farmers can get £45 a hectare for not spraying insecticides. So that's just a small win. We're also trying to decouple, so at the moment farmers get advice from agronomists that are earning commission from chemical companies, which is another massive problem. So we're trying to get farmers independent agronomic advice. In terms of the UK policy landscape, I mean obviously I started work on this 6 years ago and we've had 7 DEFRA secretaries. So we had our most recent one last week, the lovely Steve Baker. Opportunities and threats. So Brexit has brought, to be honest, the only opportunity Brexit has brought is the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which as I talked about is a move away from the way the EU did subsidies, and we hope that Labour will come in next year and kind of make that better and make it work. But it is an opportunity. If it really did pay farmers for delivering environmental goods, it would be the first of its kind in the world. But a lot of threats as well. So we've got threats coming in from trade deals with big agriculture, America, India, the Pacific trade deal. These are all with countries with weaker pesticide standards than us. So there's a lot of pressure on the government to kind of bow to that. And then just a general deregulatory agenda. So we had the retained EU law bill last year, which would have got rid of every pesticide law on the books by the end of this year. But civil society kind of joined together and the Green Party, and we managed to sort of kick that sunset clause out of that bill. But there has been a lot of threats coming with Brexit in terms of farming. So due to the amount of pesticides that are used in our farming systems, we end up with a lot of pesticide residues in our food. The government does test food for pesticide residues, but just 3,000 1-kilogram samples a year. And then they publish the data kind of a year later. So it's a very rubbish piecemeal testing system, but we take their testing results and we produce what is called the Dirty Dozen, which people can download, stick in their back pocket, and what it tells you is which fruit and veg are most likely to contain pesticide cocktails. And therefore, if you can afford it and you can access it, which is worth prioritizing as organic. So for example, like citrus and berries, always very, very high in pesticide residues. So I try and buy organic strawberries, but I can't afford to buy organic everything. So it just sort of helps people decide. But the top 10 UK supermarkets actually do a lot more on pesticides than the UK government, surprisingly. So we've been working with them, ranking on all these various topics. So what efforts they're doing to phase out the most highly hazardous pesticides, and that will mostly be in their global supply chains in a lot of developing countries where the most horrible chemicals haven't been banned. The work they're doing to support their suppliers to adopt non-chemical alternatives, their work to protect bees and pollinators. Do they still sell pesticide products to customers? How transparent are they? And what they're doing to promote organic. It's also a lot of pesticides used in gardening. We have a guide to gardening without pesticides. And actually France in 2019 banned all non-agricultural pesticides. So you can't use pesticides in towns and cities. No amateurs can use it. The only people in France who can now buy and use pesticides are licensed farmers. So that's really something we would like to see in the UK. And actually it looks like the EU might bring that in the next year across all 27 member states, which would be amazing, although leave us behind slightly, of course. So this is our Pesticide-Free Towns campaign. So the map shows you all the areas. So all the green areas are all the councils that have gone pesticide-free. The orange ones have taken significant steps towards going pesticide-free. And the green are places that there are local Pesticide-Free Towns campaigns. So This is about urban pesticide use, which again, before I took this job, I didn't even know that pesticides are sprayed in towns and cities. So it's a very hidden issue, but once you notice it, you will start seeing everywhere those telltale brown lines, which means that usually a herbicide like glyphosate has been sprayed. So in terms of who uses them, it's mostly local councils, but also other land managers, so people like universities, hospitals, housing estates. Most of it is herbicides, and a very large proportion of it in this country anyway is glyphosate, about 80%. But we don't focus on getting rid of glyphosate because we've seen some councils get rid of glyphosate to only turn to something worse. So it's really about going pesticide free. They're sprayed, as I say, on the main places are sort of parks and verges and other green spaces, pavements, schools, hospitals, unbelievably. In fact, that's a photo in Surrey of a guy spraying chemicals around a hospital. And they're done for cosmetic reasons. So there's a small amount that's used for something like invasive species, like Japanese knotweed, or for plants that do cause genuine harm to infrastructure. But most of it is cosmetic reasons, and this slight obsession in the UK with kind of neat and tidy. And, you know, God forbid you should see a plant growing on a pavement somewhere. It's a weed and it has to be removed. So it's very much a sort of mindset thing. So our Pesticide Free Towns campaign launched in 2015. Urban pesticide use, because we're such an urban population, it's actually the second most common way for people to be exposed to pesticides after diet. It's inspired by advances in Europe, as I said, France. And what we do is we provide, we're only 14 people at PAN and only 5 of us work in the UK. So mostly we support local communities to take action. And as I say, we're working now with 90 councils in the UK. We've got 120 local campaigns. And we were really pleased. We lobbied in the Environment Act of 2021. We lobbied for a duty on local authorities now have a general duty to conserve and enhance biodiversity and put into action local nature recovery strategies for England. So this can be a really key part of any council's kind of biodiversity plan. Ultimately, what we're hoping for is to flip enough councils to achieve a national ban, because councils are kind of having to do it at the moment on very little money with no support from the national government at all. So our ultimate aim is to get a national ban, and as I said, if the EU does rule a ban across all EU 27 member states, particularly under Labour, then that could be a helpful argument. So the benefits, there's massive benefits for the environment. It reduces pollution. We have a huge amount of runoff of pesticides, especially sprayed on pavements and hard surfaces, just running. You know, Brighton, for example, sits on an aquifer that has a lot of chemical pollution from the years of using pesticides. It's a major source of water pollution. On biodiversity, pollinating insects and other beneficial insects, soil microorganisms, birds, amphibians. And then also for citizens, you know, these chemicals are linked to cancer. Children are most affected. Council workers are particularly exposed. And it's also a selling point for visitors. Somewhere like the London Borough of Lambeth that's gone pesticide free, they advertise that all over the place. At Westminster as well, and they start to kind of use that as part of their pitch, I suppose. So it really does require a change in mindset. So going pesticide free does not equate to neglect. I don't know if people have seen the kerfuffle in Brighton over the weeds, but it made the Guardian and the Daily Mail, and it just went completely nuts. It doesn't have to equate to neglect. There are lots of chemical-free alternatives, and I'll speak about that in a minute, but it's not complicated like agriculture. Like agriculture is complicated because we've broken the systems that nature used to keep pests in check. If we went pesticide-free overnight in agriculture, like Sri Lanka tried a couple of years ago, it'd be an absolute disaster. Food production would collapse. Like what we need to do is we need to phase chemicals out whilst reducing it, bringing back beneficial insects, bringing back nature's natural controls. But none of those arguments apply on urban use. You don't need to spend years phasing it out. It's not about food production. We're not breaking nature. So you can really just stop. We do have a 3-year phase-out plan where we suggest to a council that in year 1 they do all their parks and green spaces, year 2 they do half the kilometres of their pavements, and then year 3 they finish the job. But actually you can do it quicker than that. We're just trying to we were basically trying to do it in an election term so that a councillor could come in, do the job, take the credit, and then get re-elected. Weeds, reframing this thing around weeds. We've just published this, and I'll give you all a postcard afterwards. Greener cities. We work with an urban botanist to go around pesticide-free areas, identifying plants. And it's this amazing guide. So you can walk around your town and city and spot all these kind of native species just sticking out the pavements. And the guide sort of has the last few pages are the guide to which plants do have to be removed because they cause infrastructure problems, but most don't. And they're just plants, you know, supposedly in the wrong place, but they, you know, we have to reframe our kind of, even the word weed, would argue, is on its way out. Oh yeah, this is our pavement plant guide, which we're very proud of. And a tree pit, I think that's in Lambeth, which is pesticide free, where the tree pits are planted up and allowed to grow. Yeah, and so some of the key messages. So councils are undermining their own positive efforts on biodiversity. We speak to lots of councils who are like, we're doing this and this, amazing, are you still spraying pesticides? Yes. It's like, okay, well, you're kind of undermining your own efforts. Could you be a bit more joined up? One thing that holds it back slightly, there is no like-for-like replacement. Like the way glyphosate works, it is cheap, it is effective, and it does its job. And what some councils try and do is stop spraying glyphosate and just swap it in for one of the non-chemical alternatives. And they don't work the same. And then they design this kind of sort of slightly disingenuous trial, I suppose, and then declare it a failure and go back to pesticides. Public support is really crucial to accept the change. So in Paris, which has been pesticide-free for a decade now, the most visited tourist city in the world, they ran a year or two public communications campaign around the benefits of being pesticide-free, the health benefits, the links to cancer of the chemicals, got people ready to accept a higher level of weediness, as they call it. And Paris has been pesticide-free for 10 years with no problems at all. And that includes their cemeteries, their sports pitches, all their public areas. So which leads me to the final message, which is that change is possible and it's already happening. Luxembourg, Belgium, every town and city in those countries is managed without pesticides. Ghent in Belgium, for any of you who've been, beautiful, been pesticide free I think for 30 years. So it is totally possible. So in terms of alternatives, as I say, there is no silver bullet. Similar to agriculture, you know, when you look at agroecology, you need different approaches. You need a more holistic approach. You need a mindset change. So it is similar. You need a clear policy. A council needs to set out what it's hoping to achieve and by when. Brighton didn't have a policy. They just stopped overnight. And now we're trying to write a policy with them, but kind of retrospectively, which is, you know, once it's been in the Guardian and the Daily Mail, it's not ideal. Communication is key. We see areas that people think are kind of been left neglectful, and then the council will put a sign in saying this area has been left to grow for wildlife, and everyone's really happy. So it's really about that. And then in terms of the alternatives, there's lots of options. There's do nothing, as I say, accept a weedier approach. Work out which bit of your places, which bit of your areas do need pesticides. Hackney saved 10 grand a year just by stopping spraying high streets because they realised that the footfall is so busy, just rips out the weeds. So they were spraying these places. It didn't need to. Prevention is better than cure. The best thing councils can do, or anyone can do, is get out in January and February and sweep up all the soil and detritus and stop the seeds establishing in the first place. Prevention is much, much better, more effective at getting rid of, if you need to get rid of weeds. There's the old-fashioned ways. That's what Brighton's been doing with hose and mulching and trowels, and then there's loads of new technologies. There's hot foam machines, there's electric wands that kind of electrocute invasive species, there's flame things, and all sorts of new technologies. But just like with renewable energy, as the demand rises, you know, the new technologies are coming on stream, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg. So we need the demand. So just to finish up, pesticide-free towns in West Sussex. I thought I'd bring a local dimension for you guys. So this is the only bit I do need to look at my notes for. So yeah, Worthing. So in July 2022, Worthing Council voted to phase out pesticides by 2024. So Worthing will be pesticide-free next year. Chichester. So Chichester passed a council motion in September 2019, sort of saying that the property team had already stopped, so I suppose there's no glyphosate used on housing estates. And made another set of recommendations which we don't think have moved forward, to be honest. So I think there's a bit of work to do in Chichester, but there is already kind of a foundation. There are active pesticide-free towns campaigns in Chichester, Worthing, Stenning and Bognor Regis. And there's a campaign, so Worthing, basically the Worthing campaign won, but then realised that West Sussex County Council managed the streets and paths. So you're still having streets and pavements in Worthing sprayed. So the Worthing campaign have now pivoted to target West Sussex County Council and to try and get them to stop at the county level. So how can we support you? We have loads of free materials and resources on our website. One of my team works all her time on supporting PFT campaigners, so she offers kind of bespoke campaign advice. We can link you up. You know, if you were interested in campaigning in Chichester, for example, we could link you up with the people who are already doing it there. We have a ton of technical expertise, so you know, if you want us to come and talk to your council, for example, in case the questions get kind of technical, we can do that. We can help draft motions. We can write pesticide policies. And then we have regular online campaigner catch-ups, one a season. And we have a very active Pesticide-Free Towns Facebook group, which is really about kind of people motivating each other and learning from each other. And I'll just leave you with a quote from Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was 60 years old last year. So it's ironic to think that man might determine his own future by something so seemingly trivial as the choice of an insect spray. So I'll leave you all with that thought. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, is there time for questions, Faye? Yeah, great, please.
It's just fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
It's absolutely. I've used it to contact the CEOs of companies, supermarkets, been in there, talked to the managers, and in the summer, when we went back, there was no Roundup on the shelves.
Can I ask which supermarket that was?
That was Sainsbury's.
Sainsbury's, yeah.
In Bognor. And then opposite, my husband was queuing up in Dyson, or I can't remember. And someone said, excuse me, mate, you got any glyphosate? She said, no, we don't sell it here because it kills bees. So it's getting through, it's coming through. Brilliant. I've been to see my parish council. I've taken all your stuff to the parish council. I've asked them, please, can you consider, please look at this and come back to me. We were talking about the hot foam treatment.
Yeah, foam stream, the hot foam machine.
So if you came in and talked to them as well.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. We do that all the time. And also what we can do is, because these machines are quite expensive, and especially at the parish council level, you don't need one for a parish council, because also what you can do, glyphosate and pesticides, you're not allowed to use in rain or wind because they drift and they're poisonous. But the alternatives you can use in any weather. So actually, someone like a parish council would only need a machine like that 3 weeks a year, you know. So what we do is we link up councils to share the machines. Brilliant. So in London, we've got a lot of councils now. So Hammersmith and Fulham bought 5, and they now rent it out to other boroughs. So yeah, we'd love to help.
So I'm Isabel. I was on Arun District Council for 4 years up till this May and last May, and now I've got lots of successors, luckily. So I'm going to suggest, I did a lot on this when I was at Arun. I brought in a biodiversity policy which was adopted, which had a lot of requests about exactly what you've been talking about, parks, gardens. West Sussex obviously does do roads and pavements, so
we need to work on that.
They need working on. But Arun were trying all sorts of things in parks and gardens. They tried the foam method, but there were always a few areas. And they brought in a lot of wildflower meadow type areas. So they really are trying hard. But I just am inspired by the fact that you could perhaps just push them that bit further if you were to talk to Arun.
100%.
Rather than like individual parishes, as you say. For these guys to really get that to move forward, because I have a feeling, like you were saying in Chichester, they've got all this in their policy, but it doesn't always happen.
Exactly.
And, sometimes they can go into a cemetery, say this happened in Arundel, and they've got contractors who do the work for them. So the contractors will go in and spray before Arun really kind of notice what they're doing. So they're not really noticing what's going on, whereas their policy says it's all fine. If you read the policy, it's all being done.
Yeah.
But in fact, on the ground, stuff's happening. So if you were to do a presentation to Arun, this is for you lot to organise, around, let's do a review of where are we with that biodiversity policy we brought in last year. and you were there for the technical side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that would really help, because obviously when I was doing it, I couldn't really say, okay, well, I understand your foam method isn't working and I know exactly why. I just had to say, okay, you said that didn't work, well done for trying.
Yes, no, I know far more
you
about
know,
the trying
so
than
yeah.
I ever wanted to.
Yeah.
So we can
So that would be really, I think that would be a really positive thing for Arun. Because, you know, like people like Liz, everybody's trying in little bits and pockets, but it actually overall is where like kind of the
It's
people.
really difficult getting
Really,
who you should go to, who you should speak to.
Yeah, and every council works completely differently. And like it's all this patchwork, you know, in one town the council will manage the roads but not this, and then another one it'll be the district, and there it'll be the parish. I mean, I think you could do a PhD just on how English councils works. It's yeah.
Oh yeah, and plus you get the problem where Arun do put wildflowers in and stop putting pesticides and herbicides. You get the public complaining in droves. Why you've done that? It looks terrible. Why have you done that?
Part of what we do is kind of mobilise that silent majority because, well, you're councillors, so you know you very rarely get positive emails from people. Mostly what you get is complaints. So I think Brighton's a really good example where actually the majority support the pesticide ban, but there's an incredibly vocal minority that are just hammering at it. And you don't hear from the majority of people. So I also think that's really important part of it. A part of this public comms thing is showing the strength of feeling on the other side. Because if all councillors are getting is complaints about weeds, then no, we'd be very happy to. Yeah, sir, at the back.
Thanks. We're trying to write the policy on pesticide use for Arundel at the moment. And when you start trying to use the word pesticide in policy, it gets very muddy because pesticide covers a wide range of things that can include organics. So when you start trying to put something into policy, it ends up being something like the council will introduce in public spaces under its direct control non-synthetic herbicides, and it's not concise enough. So do you guys have a template that could work in that situation for a policy document?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got something on our website called the Local Authority Toolkit, and that has an example of 5 or 6 really good pesticide policies. That's not a problem we've come up against a lot. So that's interesting.
The use of pesticide, the conversations we're having is, well, we can't stop it in people's gardens and personal space.
Yeah,
so you know, it's a pesticide-free town, then okay, but we have to be realistic about what we can introduce and deliver realistically. So you're then down to public spaces, public spaces that are under your control, then you're talking about the type of pesticides because you don't want to stop the use of organics.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we haven't come, I mean, if it's a council policy, of course it refers to the land under the council's control, but you can be really specific about that. I mean, I know what you're saying. You can specify herbicides if that's easier, synthetic herbicides, because that really is what we're talking about. And obviously, you know, some councils have come to us and said, oh, we use a bit of rodenticides because we've got a rat problem in like closed bait boxes. It doesn't include that. And I think for us, pesticide-free towns is less of a kind of literal policy term and more of an inspiring call to action, I suppose. Yeah, you know, we call Brighton pesticide-free, but yeah, the universities are still using pesticides, which we're trying to work on at the moment, and amateur use is still using it, but we're really targeting at the moment urban use by councils. But we could definitely help you with that wording. But people have come to us and said, would you like certify us? You know, would you do certification? And we've sort of said, no, it's not that. It's not that granular. We're not running around checking that a town that's, you know, a council that brings in a pesticide policy is truly pesticide free, I suppose. Because we're not auditors, you know, we don't have that capacity. There's only 14 of us. Yeah, please. Yeah.
And I wonder, it seems to me that is something that is so emotive, it would bring people round.
Yeah, you'd think so.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I wondered is there a lot of research to show if there's links between pesticides and allergies? Because children seem to have so many more allergies these days.
I haven't seen that specifically, but there are so many scientific papers coming out every day. And one of the problems we have with pesticide research, and I suppose it's the nature of scientific research, is that it's only ever looking at the link between one chemical and one particular health condition. So there sort of isn't any research where you can kind of draw general pesticides do this. So I suppose what would be interesting to do would be a literature review of everything out there linking any pesticide to allergies, and then I think that's how you could start to sort of create a broader picture. But I mean, it's a really good point, but it's so hard to prove. You know, look at the rise in cancers over recent years, and then we're using carcinogenic chemicals. But, you know, the 20-year epidemiological studies to prove the link, they're just not there. The funding's not there. They're not happening. It's impossible to isolate the cause. So when we say glyphosate causes cancer, and then, you know, the manufacturer Bayer spends like £300 million on undermining the WHO, for example, like the seeds of doubt they sow, they work. You know, they work. I've pitched stories to journalists when then they're about glyphosate, and they're like, oh no, it's Bayer. We don't want to. They're very litigious. We don't want to go up against Bayer. You know, so it's like. You know, the tobacco industry, I think, you know, is very similar to the agrochemical industry, so it really works. So we do have this problem with proving these links between pesticides and chronic diseases.
In America, that they have proven.
Glyphosate?
No, it's one of the pesticides. So there has been a link.
Do you mean the court cases in America?
Yes.
Yeah, so the manufacturer Bayer has lost now 3 court cases in America, and there's a class action suit with 45,000 applicants. I don't know what you call them because we don't really have them here. But yeah, they lost all 3 of those cases. They've paid out more than $1 billion in compensation, but they're juries. So what they say, they say, oh, this is just the jury system. You're like, what do these people know who've ruled on this? Do you see what I mean? Because, you know, they even go after the WHO. It was the WHO who upgraded glyphosate from a possible human carcinogen to a probable human carcinogen. And Bayer went after every single scientist individually, just like they did Rachel Carson, like Monsanto did to Rachel Carson, and undermined them and did their best to ruin their careers. And on these court cases, they've said, so when we speak to the UK government, glyphosate is approved here till 2025. And when we speak to, a lot of councils come back to us and say, oh, it's safe, it's safe. The EU says it's safe, it's about to get another 10 years approval at the EU. They say the EPA says it's safe. So they discount these court cases. Although the one people who don't discount these court cases are Bayer's shareholders, who have lost an absolute fortune. So at least that can cheer you up a little bit. Yeah.
About 30 years ago, I was very aware of Georgina Downs in this area. Is she still around? Do you have anything to do
You know
with
what?
her?
I have not. I've not heard from her. We weren't like. She wasn't a great fan of ours, to be honest. I have not heard of her since COVID. I used to follow her on Twitter, but since the pandemic, actually, I haven't heard hide nor hair of her. So no, I don't know. But we did used to work together. But we're quite a pragmatic organisation. And, you know, civil society needs, you know, all different types of organisations, but she was much more like stop everything tomorrow. And we're much more about, stop urban use tomorrow, but on, you know, we need to support farmers for a reduction in agriculture and that sort of thing. And so she didn't love our approach, if I'm totally honest. But she achieved a lot. You know, she won that case at the High Court, and then it got overturned in the appeals, so. Yeah, Faye.
I wanted to ask you really, I haven't really had much of an opportunity to look into it myself, but I know a lot of people speculate between a link between pesticides and the increasing neurodiversity in children. Now I've got 2 autistic sons, and we grew up, they were born in an area which is heavily farmed, near Brighton, Stenning. And obviously, so you've always got things running off the hills, and I just wondered if there was any sort of research and links that have been found scientifically between pesticides and I don't have a problem with neurodiversity. I actually think it's an amazing thing to work with, but you have to tease out the positives because it can make life quite challenging. So is there an established link?
There is, yeah. So some pesticides are classified officially as neurotoxins. So something like chlorpyrifos, that was actually banned by the EU in 2019, so it was banned at the same time in the UK. But the reason that was banned was because it affects the cognitive development of fetuses and young children. And it's an insecticide, it's used quite heavily in agriculture. We're very lucky to have been an EU member state, otherwise I think it would still be approved here, but it is used widely in America, everywhere outside of the EU, it's still allowed for use.
So would it be fair to say then that the massive increase in neurodiversity in our children is linked to pesticide usage?
I think we could say that there is a growing body of evidence that it could be contributing. Sorry, I know that sounds totally like I'm hedging my bets, but we're a scientific organisation, and I think I think it would be more at this stage. I think that's the level that the evidence base points to, and it also depends on what chemicals are being used, obviously. But a load of chemicals are classified officially as neurotoxins, and that's not us saying they're neurotoxins. That's their kind of official classification on the label. So I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a connection.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Please.
I've just got to, every now and then you start thinking a bit more deeply about things you already know about but try to forget. Yeah. If you think about it.
I hear that.
All our houses are full of stuff that, people buy, furniture and paint, and all our blood is absolutely teeming with stuff that we've taken in from the things around us. I'm sorry to be so...
No, we call it chemical trespass. It is, because we didn't give permission. We never gave permission.
And it's, and then we have the problem of more sickness and more illness, and our health service is groaning, trying to make people better. And this is why I became a Green so many years ago. Once you realise the vicious circle we're living in, and I think a big problem is so many people just do not make those connections. And
people are more so though. Like 5 years ago, no one in the environmental movement was talking about chemicals, really. And I see it more. There's an article like every day now with the interest in river pollution and. This recent stuff about tick and flea treatments. That wouldn't. So
that was a really good. I only learnt about that through having a dog, and I suddenly found out about that, and it just makes you realise how say vets just tell people to do it, and
and there's a lot of similarities with agriculture actually, because farmers are told that if they don't use these chemicals prophylactically, they'll lose all their crop and their business will fail. And pet owners are told that if you don't use these chemicals, which are the same chemicals, if you don't use them prophylactically, you'll get Lyme's disease and your dog will die. So it's all these messages of fear, Yeah.
In fact, I didn't use it, and you just do the combing and the dog's fine, and occasionally you find a flea. And
it's like taking paracetamol 4 times a day in case you get a headache. It doesn't matter. The only people who benefit from that is the industry. So
so I think it's just, again, it's message spreading, it's awareness spreading with people. They do. A lot of us don't want to hear these things, do we? So it's. But it is important that the messages get across.
I think it's both, isn't it? You have to be aware, but you also can't think about this all day, every day, or you drive yourself mad.
And you have to do some action.
You've got to live your life, and take action,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's someone...
Sorry, it's only just a quick point. It's just a point really to what you were saying about NFF, nature-friendly farming, etc., which seems to have been encouraged by this bunch of morons that we've got at national level, because, the damage they're doing is actually incalculable. So...
Do you mean the government?
Yeah.
I 100% agree. I'm just checking which morons you're talking about. There's a lot.
No, it's just to say that, on the one hand, they are kind of saying, because of pressure from the Greens and you guys, and they're saying, oh yeah, look, we've stepped up and we're encouraging NFF and all that. But just this week, there's, an article, I don't have to name it, do I? Because we all know where we find the articles that are telling the truth. The government are stepping down the chemical, we were inside the EU framework.
Yeah,
and
REACH.
So we were just about clinging on with our fingernails, and they've backed away from, the whole lot's going. So thank Christ they've backed away from that. But they've just come in and just completely put to the floor nearly the standards that were there, because we're outside of the EU.
I know. I mean, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, like, as I say, I'm a Green Party member, but Labour has said, they said, I think 2 weeks ago, that they were going to align more closely with the EU on chemical standards, particularly. So, yeah, hoping that the next bunch of morons will be slightly less moronic than this bunch of morons.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where we go? Well, one of the things that, as we were talking, it occurred to me as a retired teacher was nits.
Oh my God, the chemicals in knit, literally like organophosphates.
For a year.
Yeah, organophosphates that we put onto children's heads. Yeah, that blew my mind when I looked at the names of the chemicals in knit medicine. Bonkers. Yeah, tampons as well.
Yeah, that was a revelation to me when you said it. But I also had a more serious question. Well, that's quite serious as well. But, you're talking about agriculture.
Yeah.
So at what state is the argument? Because obviously the argument for using all the pesticides is food production and levels of food production.
Yes.
So at what point is the argument about reducing but maintaining levels of food production?
I mean, I think you then get into deeper conversations around what we're growing and why. I mean, a third of food is wasted. Most of the grain we produce goes into industrial livestock farming. So I think, like, arguing that we need to maintain the current amount of food we're producing is ridiculous. We're sort of living in this post-World War II narrative. Genuinely needed to increase food production, because otherwise Europe would have starved. But we're, like, holding on to that now. So DEFRA's completely obsessed with yield. It's always about the yield. What about the yield? What about the yield? And what we've been trying to encourage them is to move away from yield and actually look at net income, because that's what farmers care about. That's what business people care about. It's making a living. And actually, if we can stop measuring everything in yield, then we can get away from this kind of belief that we need to stick with intensive production models and start moving more towards kind of agroecology and things like that. So I actually reject that argument on food. They always throw food security back at us. But I think when you're wasting a third of food, I don't really think that argument stands. Because the food system's so broken. It's, yeah.
It's just a really quick question about the current thing that's exercising all of us, really. Came from France. Oh, thank God we got that. And obviously the pest industry is having to deal with...
Oh, is this bed bugs? Yeah.
If PAN have got anything to say about how to deal with bed bugs, just that you could put out.
No, we
go that way.
We don't. Maybe we should. I suppose this sounds very niche, but officially they would be kind of biocides, so we haven't tended to work on them, but then no one works on biocides, so like someone needs to. And actually the saddest thing I was reading about, because Paris has been pesticide-free for 10 years, and now sections of Paris are being sprayed with insecticides for the first time, and I was just thinking about all that wildlife that has kind of flourished while it's been pesticide-free and now being exposed.
And another insect or
yeah, that can eat them. We can introduce locusts or something. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I'm not sure. That sounds like a slightly dangerous plan, but yeah. Oh, sorry, what?
You can use food grade diatomaceous earth.
Can you what, for bed bugs?
Yes, it breaks their shell down. It kills them.
Oh, well, there you go.
Why don't we use them?
You just have to be careful.
I don't like steam.
Steam?
So from what I heard of some people that had them, is if you use wallpaper steamers,
right.
If you go around the outside of your bed, they go to the edge of the mattress and you give them steam, then that really don't like that.
Okay, good tip.
And steam should be fairly harmless.
I mean, I'm sure as bed bugs arrive in Europe, there will be companies kind of developing these kind of technologies for dealing with them, I suppose. But maybe we do need a position on it. At the moment, I'm just not sitting down on the tube. Yes?
Do you ever encourage the use of nematodes against, obviously, pests? I mean, watering nematodes on, so it's an insect that feeds on obviously the pest, or what they consider a pest. So
we do.
Is that not used widely, and it should be.
Yeah, no, it absolutely should be. And I think at the moment they're almost used exclusively in greenhouses. And we actually ran a roundtable for UK supermarkets last year called Biocontrols from the Greenhouse to the Field. And this amazing, a few companies came and spoke to supermarkets, and one of them was like literally you put on like backpacks of beneficial insects and you spray them over the crop like you would a pesticide. It's pretty amazing. So yes, we would absolutely, beneficial insects are a really key part of moving away from insects, from pesticides, reintroducing nature's controls.
They might even work on bed bugs.
Yeah, oh yeah, but I don't know if you want to put them into your house. Yeah, but I was really shocked. I don't know if you guys probably know this, but I was really shocked to find out that in America they have so few bees left. They don't have enough wild pollinators left to pollinate their crops. So they have companies driving bees around. Yeah, so you guys all know this. That blew my mind. I mean, I hope we never get there.
It's incredibly cruel.
Oh my God, like just the whole, what it says about the society they've created, what it does to the bees. I mean, the whole model is just broken. So thankfully we're not there yet.
But we follow America.
Yeah.
Not on everything. Yeah. So.
As a percentage, or what is the worst for an average person? I mean, is someone consuming more chemicals from their diet, or are they consuming more chemicals from walking through a town or from garden pesticides that they're using?
Oof, that's a hard question, because it depends how you eat. It depends where you live.
I meant Joe average, yeah.
I don't know. I live in Brighton, which is pesticide free, so I'd presume I'm more exposed in my diet. Although I do walk my dog on the downs a lot, which is quite agricultural heavy. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, you can. An organisation called Link just did a really clever thing with all the MPs who sit on the Environmental Audit Committee in Parliament, and they tested all their hair for chemical residues. So you can do that. You can send your hair off to a lab, and you can get it tested, and you can see what you're exposed to. There's also these silicone bracelets you can wear. So for our pets report, we just did a little anecdotal experiment where we put one on one of our dogs who's like running around the downs all week and just saw what came back. So there are ways to find out what you're being exposed to if you're interested. Yeah, right. The only problem is then it might freak you out, and I'm not sure you can stop being exposed to them. So it depends whether you want to know. But there are ways to find out, but it really depends how you live and eat. Is the answer to that question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. You mentioned streams and rivers.
Yeah.
Do you have much evidence about pesticide effects on like harbours and water, the sea?
That's not something there's much less data on that. Yeah. I don't think the sea is monitored in the same way that fresh water is. I mean, one thing I read that recently which horrified me was because the ice caps are melting, obviously, they're releasing all these legacy chemicals. So there's all this DDT coming back in, and chemicals that have been banned like 50 years ago that have gone through the water. But you're talking about like in places like Antarctica that's never had any agriculture, showing sort of how mobile and persistent they are. So I would have thought, given how mobile and persistent they are in the sea. But actually, there's very little monitoring on that. Very little monitoring. Have they? And I'm sure it's something like the Marine Conservation Society or someone like that would... Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, I mean, I'd be very surprised if they're not, if they're not.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so...
Are you or any other organisation doing any research on insect recovery in areas which have gone pesticide free? Making the link between pesticides and insecticides.
Such a good question. We are actually trying to get something off the ground at the moment with Newcastle University, because at the moment we're not actually an academic organisation, so I'm like a policy person more than an academic. So when we do conduct research, we tend to do it with academics.
It's good to have some figures. That's what
yeah, exactly, 100%, because it's really, really needed. And so Newcastle has gone pesticide free very recently, so we've been able to establish a baseline, and now we're going to track it for the next 3 to 5 years and try and get some actual figures, because it's so important.
we were travelling in Southern Ireland earlier this year, and I've never been so delighted to see a screen spattered with insects.
Right. Wow. Oh, I'm jealous. Yeah. So.
Just following up on that, what we're doing in Arundel at the moment is obviously, as I said, we're working on the pesticide-free side of things. But prior to that, we're doing baseline surveys of pollinators around various areas of the town. So we're engaging some citizen science type approaches in people's gardens, public spaces, link areas, so we can track over time temporal changes to distribution and species.
And to start before you go pesticide free is absolutely perfect. Yeah, perfect.
We'll be able to track that over the coming 5 years or so, and we'll be publishing those.
Oh, we would love to see your results. That's really interesting. That's brilliant. Yeah, the more places we can do that and start to build the case. Because DEFRA still says to us, "Oh, we don't have the evidence." Like, how much evidence do you need of harms? You know, they're still, yeah.
Right, is that all the questions?
I think I've exhausted everybody.
Amazing. Yeah. Can we give Josie a round?
Oh, thank you so much. Shall I just, is it all right if I just leave some stuff at the front?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is just a postcard which sends you to our pavement plant guide, and that you can download, and then there's just a few like very intro leaflets to the Pesticide-Free Towns campaign in case anybody wants.
Nice. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Josie.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.